My eldest son began sleepwalking when he was around 8 or 9 years old. I had heard that kids sometimes go through phases like this, so at first I wasn't too worried. It was a little unsettling, sure, but nothing that seemed serious. I'm a light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me noticing. That's actually how I first discovered my son sleepwalking. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, shifting his weight slightly from one foot to the other. His eyes were open, but they weren't really seeing anything. That was the part that always unsettled me. If you've ever lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I mean. His gaze passed right through me, vacant and distant, as if he were looking at something beyond my sight. Sometimes he would mumble under his breath, his words too quiet and slurred to understand. Other times he would stand there in complete silence, just breathing in a slow, steady rhythm that somehow made the whole situation feel even eerier. I would gently guide him back to bed, whispering his name and reassuring him that everything was fine. He never remembered any of it the next morning. A few months after realizing he was a sleepwalker, things took a strange turn. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It reminded me of water dripping against a window pane, but it wasn't raining outside. The sound was soft, barely loud enough to wake me. At first, I thought I had imagined it, just some distant noise blending into a dream. But as I lay there listening, the tapping continued. It wasn't random like rain. It was steady, deliberate, and precise. I sat up and turned toward the door, where the sound was coming from. Once I realized it wasn't stopping, I accepted that I had to investigate. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to wake him. I should clarify that I wasn't scared, just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. I stepped into the hallway and saw my son standing there, facing the wall. His forehead lightly tapped against it in slow, measured beats. His fingertips brushed against the surface in sync with his head, as if he were trying to push through it. I remember whispering his name, barely above a breath, but he didn't respond. He just kept pressing his head against the wall, knocking rhythmically, like he was testing something, like he was trying to move through it. I hesitated before reaching out to him. Something about the way he moved sent a deep chill through me. But eventually, I placed my hand on his shoulder and shook him just enough to break the trance. He blinked, took a small step back, and let me guide him back to bed, as if nothing had happened. By morning, he had no recollection of it. It happened a few more times, but not frequently. I convinced myself it was just another odd quirk of sleepwalking, maybe some subconscious response to the presence of the wall, his dreaming mind misinterpreting his surroundings. Eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped, and the eerie hallway encounters became nothing more than a strange memory, until my younger son started sleepwalking years later. At first, I dismissed it. Kids go through phases, and sometimes siblings share similar behaviors. It wasn't surprising, just a little uncanny that they both started at the same age. But again, I didn't think too much of it. Genetics can be a funny thing. Then I started noticing the small details, the things that made my unease grow. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked, it was how he sleepwalked. He would stand in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes open but unfocused. He moved in the exact same way my older son had, with that slow, unsettling rhythm, like his movements weren't entirely random. It was eerie, like reliving a memory. And then, one night, I woke up to that same tapping noise. I already knew what I'd see before I even stepped into the hallway. And sure enough, there he was, his forehead pressed against the exact same spot on the wall, knocking against it just as his brother had all those years ago. The slow, rhythmic tapping, the delicate brushing of his fingertips. I whispered his name. Nothing. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Nothing. He just kept knocking, his small body swaying slightly, trapped in some unreachable place. And that's when the realization hit me. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason, no logical explanation for him to exhibit the exact same behavior. Not just the wandering, but the standing, the tapping, the eerie sense of urgency. And for some reason, that thought made me feel sick. After some coaxing, I finally pulled him out of his trance. I led him back to bed, tucked him in, and told myself it was just another coincidence. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. No more sleepwalking, no more tapping. And, like before, he had no memory of it. For years, I didn't think about it. Honestly, I had forgotten the whole thing. But there's a reason I'm writing this now. My sons are both in college now, and the house feels much quieter than I'm used to. My husband and I decided to do some renovations, a fresh start, new floors, new paint, just some minor updates to make the place feel new again. While stripping away the old wallpaper, we found something underneath. At first, I thought it was just an odd stain or backing paper, but as we peeled more away, I felt my breath catch. It was an antique-style mirror, a mirror that had been completely covered. The first thing that crossed my mind was, why? Why would someone cover a mirror instead of simply removing it? It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to find it. that it had been hidden for a reason. And then I realized something that sent a cold wave through me. The mirror was positioned in the exact spot where my sons had been knocking their heads against the wall all those years ago. The memories came rushing back. I stood there in stunned silence. There was no reason they should have known the mirror was there. They couldn't have, and yet, somehow, they both had. Both of them had instinctively been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see beneath the wallpaper. Even setting aside the fact that they were unconscious, how did they know? I got rid of the mirror immediately, but I can't stop thinking about it. There has to be a logical explanation for this, but I haven't found one yet. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will.